Have you ever had a bird land at your window right after losing someone you loved? Not in the garden, not out in the street, at your window, looking directly at you, perfectly still, as though it had come there with a purpose you couldn't quite explain, yet felt with absolute clarity, deep in your chest, in a place that has no name. And you wondered quietly whether it was possible, whether that bird had something to do with the person who had just gone. And then reason stepped in and said no, that things like that don't happen, that it was just a coincidence. But something in you, something deeper than reason, was never fully convinced. And that question has been living inside you ever since, without an answer. Saint Teresa of Avila had one, and what she wrote about birds and souls is going to change the way you look at your window forever. That question you've been carrying wasn't born out of fear or superstition. It was born out of love. Because love doesn't easily accept that death is the end of everything. Because something within us knows, with a certainty that needs no proof, that the bonds of the heart are not severed with a final breath. Saint Teresa of Avila knew this. She lived it. She wrote it down. And today, in this very moment, what she left sealed within her pages is going to reach you. Write in the comments the name of that person you lost, the one you still carry in your heart, just their name. It is an act of love. And if you'd like to keep receiving these teachings from Saint Teresa of Avila on souls and the life beyond, subscribe right now and turn on the bell. Because what is coming in the next messages is something you cannot afford to miss. There is an image that Saint Teresa of Avila used to describe the soul, one that none of her Carmelite sisters ever forgot. She wrote it in the book of her life with that blend of precision and tenderness that set her apart. That ability to speak of the highest realities in words so close and warm, they felt as though they were whispered in your ear. She said that the soul, in its search for God, is like a little moth. Not an eagle, not a falcon, a little moth, small and fragile, not entirely sure where it's going, yet unable to stop moving toward the light. It flies and falls and rises again. It carries within its wings something it doesn't fully understand, yet that something drives it without rest toward a flame that consumes and transforms it all at once. That image was no accident. Saint Teresa of Avila lived surrounded by birds. The convent of Saint Joseph in Avila had a small garden, austere, like everything she chose for her life, but very much alive. And in that garden, there were birds. She listened to them from the grill of her cell during her hours of prayer. She watched them with that contemplative attention that mystics bring to all of creation. Because for a soul like hers, all of creation is a language that God uses to speak to those who know how to listen. Birds were not decoration to her, nor background noise. They were presences. Small signs of an invisible order seeping through the visible world for those with eyes to see it. And what Saint Teresa of Avila came to understand about birds goes far beyond what anyone might expect. Because she didn't simply contemplate them as symbols of the soul's journey toward God. She grasped something about the relationship between birds and the souls of those who have passed. Something bound up with the communion of saints, that truth of the Catholic faith we profess in the Creed and so often recite without pausing to take in its full meaning. The communion of saints is not a beautiful phrase. It is a living reality. It is the certainty that death does not sever the bonds between those who loved one another on earth. That those who have gone remain in relationship with those who remain. That love has no border between this world and the next. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches this with great clarity. Those who have died in Christ and those still living form a single body. The Pilgrim Church, the Purifying Church, and the Triumphant Church are one church, one family of God, in which death is a doorway not a wall. And within that communion, God permits those we have loved and lost to draw near to us at certain moments, not to trouble us, not to frighten us, but to be with us, to remind us that the love we shared did not die with their body, to ask something of us, something concrete that only we can give them. Saint Teresa of Avila lived this firsthand. In the book of her life, she describes with a candor that still moves readers today how after the death of her father, she felt his presence in ways she could not explain rationally, yet recognized with the full clarity of her faith. And it was in those very experiences that she began to understand something, that God uses what is created, the simplest and most ordinary elements of the visible world, to build bridges between the living and those who have gone. Not always through extraordinary visions, not always through mystical ecstasies reserved for the most advanced souls, sometimes through something as small, as humble, as apparently insignificant as a bird landing at a window. The first bird that Saint Teresa of Avila connected to the visit of a departed soul is the wood pigeon. Not the familiar city pigeon, the one we see in town squares, domesticated almost to the point of losing its mystery. The wood pigeon is different. It is larger, wilder, more elusive. It does not approach human beings easily. It lives in woodlands and open fields, and when it settles near a house, near a window, it does so because something has brought it there that does not belong to the natural order of its instincts. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about the dove with a particular reverence. She saw it as an image of the Holy Spirit, as the whole biblical and patristic tradition does, but also as a creature possessing a special sensitivity to invisible realities. There is something about the wood pigeon that makes it permeable to what lies beyond the veil. Something in its stillness, in its gaze, in the way it can remain motionless for long stretches while the world around it seems to make no impression. That makes it a fittingly pure vessel for a presence coming from the other side. When a wood pigeon arrives at your window in the days or weeks following the death of someone dear to you, and stays and looks at you and does not flee even as you draw near, Saint Teresa of Avila had something to say about that moment. Something her sisters heard in the chapter room of the convent, recorded in the documents of the order with a precision the centuries have not erased. But before we arrive there is something you need to understand about why Saint Teresa of Avila knew these things. Because she didn't invent them. She didn't imagine them. She received them in a way she herself described as one of the most unexpected and most transforming graces of her entire interior life. And that grace arrived precisely during an hour of prayer, when a bird settled on the grill of her cell and did not leave. That afternoon in the convent of St. Joseph, Saint Teresa of Avila did not move. Neither did the bird. They remained like that, the saint in prayer and the small creature on the grill. For a length of time, she described as impossible to measure, because in that state, the ordinary sense of time dissolves and only a presence remains, one that fills everything. And in that shared silence between a woman of God and a small feathered creature, something opened within her, an understanding that didn't arrive as words but as certainty. The certainty that certain birds in certain moments, are not where they are by chance, that there is a loving intelligence behind their presence, that God, who governs even the flight of the humblest sparrow, sometimes uses these winged creatures to thread an invisible line between this world and the one beyond the veil. This is not superstition. It is important to say this plainly, because Saint Teresa of Avila was a woman of extraordinary intellectual clarity, a reformer, a founder, a writer whom the Church declared a doctor of the Church precisely because her thought is solid, rigorous, and deeply orthodox. When she speaks of signs within creation, she is not speaking from naivety or magical thinking. She is speaking from the firmest theology, the doctrine that God is Lord of all creation and may use it as an instrument of His providence whenever his loving will so chooses. The second bird is the sparrow, and the Gospel of Matthew had already foretold it with a precision that Saint Teresa of Avila knew by heart. In her own words, she frequently reminded her sisters that the Lord himself had said that not a single sparrow falls to the ground without the Father knowing it, and that we are worth far more than many sparrows. But what Saint Teresa of Avila wanted her sisters to understand was not simply the value of the human soul before God. It was something more specific. It was this: if God knows every sparrow, if none escapes his providence, then no sparrow arrives at any window without God knowing it and permitting it. And when God permits it at a particular moment, for a particular person, right after a particular loss, that is not an empty permission. It is a loving disposition of his providence. The sparrow that comes to your window after losing someone is the most humble of the 5 birds. It has neither the bearing of the wood pigeon nor the beauty of the nightingale. It is small, brown, almost invisible among other birds. And precisely because of that, when it arrives and stays and looks at you with a stillness that doesn't belong to its nature, when it doesn't flee but remains as though it has something to do there, it draws attention in a different way than a more striking bird would. It draws attention because its quiet presence has no natural explanation. Sparrows are nervous, restless, always in motion. A sparrow sitting perfectly still at your window, looking directly at you, that is, from the very first, something outside the normal order of things. Saint Teresa of Avila taught that the sparrow represents the soul that returns without fanfare, the humble soul that does not come to impress, but simply to love, the mother who departed without grand words, who lived her life in the quiet of daily service and self-giving, and who returns in the very same way she lived, without noise, without spectacle, with that same simplicity she carried through life. The father who worked his whole life without asking for recognition, who loved his family in that steady, unspoken way that children sometimes only learn to appreciate once he is gone. Those souls, Saint Teresa of Avila says, have a particular affinity with the sparrow, because the sparrow speaks to them. And here a question opens up that deserves to stay with you as you take in what comes next. Because Saint Teresa of Avila wrote something about what happens in the soul of the departed at the precise moment the bird settles on the sill. Something about what that soul feels, what it experiences, what it is searching for in that exact instant when the bird touches the ledge of your window and is still. And what she wrote changes the way we understand these visits entirely, because it is not only a sign, it is an encounter. And in every encounter there are 2 sides, and both of them feel something. What the soul feels in that moment, Saint Teresa of Avila described with an image her sisters copied into their spiritual notebooks, because not one of them wanted to forget it. She said that the soul, visiting through the bird, experiences something like what a traveler feels, who has walked a long time through a dark road and suddenly sees, far in the distance, the light of a lit window. The traveler hasn't arrived yet, still on the way, but that light says, "You are not alone. Someone is on the other side waiting. Your absence has not been forgotten." And that certainty gives the soul strength to keep walking toward God with a lightness it did not have before. You are that light. When you see the bird and something in you recognizes it, when your heart responds with that interior movement you can't quite name but feel with perfect clarity, you are lighting a window for the soul you love. You are saying to that soul, without words, through the simple openness of your heart, "I see you, I remember you, I have not forgotten you." And that, according to Saint Teresa of Avila, is exactly what that soul needed to receive in that moment. There is a truth about swallows that people in earlier times knew, and that we have forgotten in our rush to explain everything with categories that leave no room for mystery. Swallows leave. They always leave. They arrive in spring with a punctuality that seemed miraculous to the people who waited for them through the centuries. They fill the air with their swift and unmistakable flight. They nest under the eaves of houses with a fidelity to place that ornithologists still study with wonder. And then, when summer ends, they disappear. They don't say goodbye. They don't announce their departure. One day they are there, and the next they are gone. And their absence leaves in the air something like the silence that settles in a house after someone has left for good. Saint Teresa of Avila knew the swallows of the convent. She had watched them for years from her cell, seen them return each spring to the same nests under the same eaves, heard their sharp call on mornings of prayer. And one year, after the death of one of her most beloved sisters in the community, she noticed something that stayed with her with the vividness of things God does not want us to forget. A swallow came to the window of the deceased sister's cell. It came alone, without the others, at a time of year when swallows did not usually frequent that part of Castile. It landed on the sill. It remained there for a time, and then it left. No one in the convent discussed it as a supernatural phenomenon. Saint Teresa of Avila didn't either, but she held it. She carried it within her for months, worked it through in prayer, set it alongside her theology and her mystical experience, and arrived at an understanding she later shared with her sisters. In one of those chapter conversations that the discalced Carmelites knew how to receive with a heart held in stillness. The swallow, Saint Teresa of Avila said, is the image of a soul already in motion toward God, yet still holding a bond with those it loved on earth. Like the bird that returns year after year to the same nest, the soul that loved deeply feels drawn toward the places and persons in whom it deposited its love during life. This is not an attachment that holds it back. It is not a chain that stops it along the way. It is more like a pulse of tenderness, a final gesture of love that wants to make sure those left behind are all right, that they are not alone, that faith did not go out with the departure. And this is where the swallow at the window takes on its deepest meaning. When this bird arrives unexpectedly, out of season, alone, and lingers in silence before departing, Saint Teresa of Avila taught that it is the clearest sign of a soul in transit, not stuck, not suffering in a way that demands urgent rescue, though suffrage is always welcome and never wasted, but walking, moving forward, and yet in that journey finding a moment, an opening in the order of providence to draw close one last time to those left behind and say something that words alone could never carry. The testimonies of the discalced Carmelites about these visits are numerous and are recorded in the archives of the order with the seriousness that characterized the communities Saint Teresa of Avila founded. Women of solid faith, cultivated intellect, and deep interior life. Women who did not surrender easily to pious interpretations without grounding. When these women recorded the appearances of swallows at moments of grief, they did so because they had learned from their foundress to discern with clear, theologically grounded criteria. Not every bird is a sign, not every coincidence is a visit, but there are moments when the convergence of circumstances, the time, the place, the behavior of the bird, the interior disposition of the one receiving it, forms a whole that surpasses natural explanation. The sisters learned to recognize those moments. They also learned the right response, which is neither fear nor excitement, but something far simpler and far more powerful: prayer. Because if the soul has come in visit, what it needs is not your astonishment. It needs your active love. It needs that encounter to become a bridge of intercession. And at this point, there is a question that Saint Teresa of Avila left in writing, one that none of her sisters could fully answer until years after her death. A question about what the soul wants to say to you and has not yet been able to. About what it carries on that brief flight to your window. About what it leaves in the air of your room before returning once more to God. Because the soul does not arrive empty-handed. It brings something. and that something, according to the Teresian writings, has the power to shift the direction of your own spiritual life if you know how to receive it. What the soul brings, what it leaves in that moment. Saint Teresa of Avila described in a passage from the interior castle that readers have quoted for centuries without fully grasping what concrete reality it pointed to. Now, with everything you have heard up to this point, you are in a position to understand it in a way that was not possible before. In the fifth dwelling of the interior castle, Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about the soul that has already crossed the threshold of death, with an intimacy that surprises even the most seasoned readers of her work. She does not speak of the soul as a distant or abstract reality. She speaks of it as someone known, as a traveler whose path can be described with some precision, because she herself, in her highest states of prayer, had been brought to contemplate realities beyond the reach of ordinary sense. And in one of those passages, she wrote something that commentators have interpreted in many ways, but which, read with the simplicity she always asked of her readers, says something very specific about what the soul brings when it returns. She says that the soul which has loved on earth carries within itself, even after death, the memory of love. Not memory as we understand it, that archive of images and emotions stored and retrieved by the mind. Something deeper and more lasting, the shape that love left engraved on the soul itself through all the years of shared life. Every act of self-giving, every sacrifice, every moment of genuine tenderness between two people who truly loved one another leaves a mark on the soul that does not disappear with the body. It remains, and that mark is what the soul brings when it draws close to its own. It is, in a sense, the sum of everything they were to one another, the cleanest gift it can offer. The fourth bird is the robin, and it has one quality that sets it apart from all the others in this account, making it the most unmistakable of the five, its red breast. That color which in every culture and in every era has been linked to the heart, to blood, to love that costs something. In Christian tradition, legend holds that it was a robin who tried to pull the thorns from the crown of thorns with its small beak, and in doing so stained its breast with the blood of the Lord. The Church does not define such legends as dogma, but she preserves them as part of that folk wisdom, which sometimes expresses theological truths with a beauty that academic theology doesn't always manage to reach. Saint Teresa of Avila knew that legend, and when she spoke of the robin in relation to the souls of the departed, she pointed precisely to that red breast as the key to its meaning. The robin that comes to your window after losing someone is, according to her teaching, the sign of a soul that comes to remind you that the love you shared was real, that it was not an illusion, that it was not lost, that this love, with all it cost, with all its imperfections, with its moments of light and shadow, was engraved upon the soul of the one who left as something precious, something that God Himself recognizes and holds dear. And here the question closes, the one that has been open since earlier in this account, about what happens in the soul of the departed at the exact moment the bird settles at your window. Saint Teresa of Avila described it in a way her sisters received in silence because it needed time to settle. She said that in that moment the soul experiences something we might call a relief of love, as though the tension between its desire to keep moving toward God and the love it still holds for those left behind finds, in that instant of contact through the bird, a temporary resolution, not final, temporary. The soul touches its own people. It senses that they receive it, even if not entirely consciously. And that certainty grants it a peace that frees it to continue its journey with less weight. This has practical and spiritual consequences that Saint Teresa of Avila emphasized again and again. Because if the soul is eased when we acknowledge it, if our receptiveness, even when barely conscious, produces that effect, then our response to these visits is not a small matter. It is not merely a pious gesture that makes us feel better. It is a real and concrete way of helping the soul along its path. In the theological language she herself used, it is a suffrago, a spiritual act of assistance. Not the formal suffrago of the Mass or the Rosary, each of which carries its own immense value and to which we will return, but a suffrago of the heart, an act of love that the soul receives and that does it good. The doctrine of purgatory, which Saint Teresa of Avila lived with a depth that few souls have matched, is not a doctrine of punishment. It is a doctrine of love. It is the certainty that God does not discard the souls who arrive before Him still bearing marks. He purifies them. He works with them with the patience of a goldsmith who knows what lies within the metal and does not give up until every last trace of gold is brought to light. And in that process of purification, the love of those who remain on earth is not irrelevant. It reaches the soul. It holds it. It walks alongside it. And sometimes, when God's providence allows, the soul finds a way to let those left behind know it is there, that it loves them, that the road it has taken is real, and that at the end of that road there is a light worth every step it takes to get there. The nightingale sings at night. Everyone knows that. But what very few people know, and what Saint Teresa of Avila did know because she had spent entire nights awake in prayer and heard that song in the darkness of the convent with an attention that went far beyond aesthetic pleasure, is that the nightingale's song at night has a quality unlike any other bird's song. It is not only beautiful, it is persistent, it is insistent. It is a song that does not yield to silence but cuts right through it. A song that does not wait for daylight to make itself heard, but works precisely in the dark and seems directed not at any particular listener, but at the air itself, at the night itself, as though it was singing for God alone in the hour when all others sleep. Saint Teresa of Avila saw in this a perfect image of contemplative prayer. In The Way of Perfection, she wrote about the necessity of praying even when God seems absent, even when the soul feels nothing, even when the interior darkness is so dense that singing seems absurd. The nightingale does not wait to feel something before it sings. It does not wait for an audience before it continues. It sings because that is its deepest nature, because something within it cannot do otherwise than rise toward the darkness with every note it has. And Saint Teresa of Avila wanted her sisters to learn from the nightingale that kind of unconditional faithfulness. But there is something more she taught about this bird in relation to the souls of those who have passed. Something that connects the nightingale's song in the night to the prayer that the soul of the departed continues to offer from wherever it now is. Because the souls in purgatory are not silent, they pray. Their entire existence in that state of purification is a form of prayer, a continuous offering of themselves to the mercy of God, a sustained song in the darkness of the purifying process that works upon them and transforms them. And that song, which we cannot hear with the ears of the body, sometimes filters through to us by way of the visible world. Sometimes it takes the form of a nightingale singing at an unexpected moment, in an unexpected place, in a way that doesn't quite fit with what birds naturally do. The fifth bird is the nightingale, and its arrival at your window, especially in the nighttime hours or at dawn, especially on the days of deepest grief, carries a meaning that Saint Teresa of Avila described with extraordinary delicacy. She said that the nightingale singing close to you in those moments is the sign of a soul that still has a voice, a soul that is not mute, not lost, but active, prayerful, on its way. Its song is saying to you, I am still here, I am still myself, I am still loving, still moving toward God, and in that movement I carry you with me, because there is no way I could leave you behind. There is something here that deserves a moment's pause, because it runs against the image many people carry of purgatory, an image of passive suffering, of anxious waiting, of souls who only endure and wait for someone on earth to come and rescue them. Saint Teresa of Avila rejected that image, not because purgatory involves no suffering, but because suffering is not the only thing happening there. The souls in purgatory love. They pray. They long for God with an intensity that we, still distracted by so many things, can barely imagine. And that longing is itself a purification, a flame that burns away whatever remains imperfect and clears the way for what is pure. Now, the central question that has been held open throughout this account still does not have a full answer. We know that birds can be a sign of a visit. We know what soul each bird represents. We know something of what the soul experiences in that moment. But we still don't know how to tell, with any certainty, whether the bird at your window is truly a visit or simply a bird. Because not every wood pigeon is your mother. Not every sparrow is your father. Saint Teresa of Avila knew this, and so she set down in writing a set of signs. 4 precise criteria by which to discern, with Catholic grounding and interior peace, whether what you are experiencing belongs to the order of loving providence or simply to the natural world of birds looking for food on windowsills. The first of those criteria has to do with time, not clock time, but the time of grief. Authentic visits, according to the teaching of Saint Teresa of Avila, occur within a period she described as the time of active mercy. The first months following a death, when the soul of the departed is still in that initial adjustment to its new state, when the separation is most recent and the love uniting the living and the dead is still most taut, most alive. That doesn't mean visits are impossible after that period, but they become less frequent because the soul advances and the distance, in spiritual terms, takes on a different character. The second criterion concerns the behavior of the bird. We have touched on this, but it deserves to be said clearly. A bird acting as a messenger does not behave like a normal bird. It stays when it should go. It draws close when it should flee. It looks at you in a way that doesn't fit the usual relationship between birds and human beings. There is something in its behavior that catches your attention, not through anything dramatic, but through that unusual stillness or persistence that has no explanation in the bird's natural habits. The third criterion that Saint Teresa of Avila identified for discerning whether the bird at your window is an authentic visit concerns your own interior, and this is, of the 4, the most important. Because external criteria, the timing of the grief, the behavior of the bird, can guide you, but they can never give you the certainty that only the heart can offer when it is well disposed. Saint Teresa of Avila pressed this upon her sisters again and again. External signs illuminate, but discernment happens within. And what happens within when a visit is genuine has very specific characteristics, ones she described with the clarity of someone who had lived them herself. The first thing you feel, according to her teaching, is not fear. Fear may come later, as a natural reaction from a mind unprepared for what it is receiving. But the first thing, what arrives before the mind has time to interpret anything, is a peace. A strange, unusual peace that doesn't belong to the grief you have been carrying. As though something in the air shifts temperature. As though the room fills with a presence you cannot name, but somehow recognize. And that peace, Saint Teresa of Avila says, is the signature of love. Love does not frighten. Love pacifies. And when the soul of someone who loved you draws near, the first thing it brings is that love. Love that was real on earth and has not lost any of its essential qualities in crossing the threshold of death. The second thing that happens is that you think of that person. Not forcefully, not because you are making an effort to remember them, but spontaneously, without transition, as though their name or their face or some particular memory surfaced on its own from somewhere deep within, without you calling for it. And that thought comes accompanied by an emotion that is not exactly sadness, though there may be tears. It is something closer to pure love. Love without the anguish of loss. Love that knows the person it remembers is still alive, even if unseen. The fourth criterion, and with this Saint Teresa of Avila completed her teaching on discernment, is what the encounter leaves behind when it ends. When the bird flies away, when the presence fades, when you return to ordinary life, what remains? If what remains is disturbance, anxiety, fear, or confusion, if you feel that something is missing or something is off, then that experience did not come from the place of love. Authentic visits, according to Teresian teaching, always leave a deposit of peace and spiritual impulse. You find yourself wanting to pray. You feel a renewed love for the person you lost. You are left with a clarity you didn't have before about something unresolved in your relationship with that person, or something you need to do for their soul. And here we arrive at the most practical and most urgent question of everything we have discussed. Because recognizing the visit is only the first step. What you do afterward is what truly matters. And Saint Teresa of Avila was very concrete about this, with that directness that marked her even when she was speaking of the highest realities. She did not leave her sisters with a beautiful understanding that had no application. She told them exactly what to do. The first thing is immediate prayer, not the full rosary if you can't manage it in that moment. Not an hour of adoration if the conditions aren't right. A short, direct, heartfelt prayer. Something as simple as, Lord, if the soul of this person I love has come to visit me, receive my love as a gift for them. Help them on their journey. Purify whatever needs to be purified. Bring them home to you. That prayer, made with genuine faith and love, holds a value that Saint Teresa of Avila placed among the purest acts of charity a living soul can perform. Because it is charity towards someone who cannot repay it, who cannot thank you in person, who depends entirely on your free and generous love. And the second is the Mass. If you are able, have a Mass offered for the soul of the departed. Ask a priest to celebrate it with that intention, or attend Mass yourself and offer your communion for that soul. The Mass is the most powerful suffrago that exists, according to Catholic doctrine and the constant teaching of the saints and of the popes. Because at Mass, the very sacrifice of Christ is made present, and that sacrifice carries an infinite value that reaches the living and the dead alike. Saint Teresa of Avila had an extraordinary devotion to the Mass and taught that a single Mass offered with faith and love for her soul can do for it what years of private prayers cannot always achieve. The third is the Rosary. Mary, who is Mother of the living and of the dead, who intercedes without ceasing for the souls in purgatory, receives the Rosary offered for a departed loved one with a particular tenderness. Saint Teresa of Avila did not leave detailed instructions about the Rosary, since her spirituality centered on mental prayer. But the Carmelite tradition that followed her, faithful to her spirit, has always emphasized the importance of Marian intercession for souls. To pray a Rosary after receiving a visit is to place the suffrago in Mary's hands, to let her carry it to where it needs to go. The fourth, and perhaps the most surprising of all the responses Saint Teresa of Avila taught, is forgiveness. If there is something unresolved between you and that person, something that was never settled in life, a wound that never healed, a word that was never said, a misunderstanding that death interrupted before it could be repaired, this is the moment to let it go. To say it aloud if you need to say it. To forgive if forgiveness is what you need to give. To ask for forgiveness if that is what you need to offer, even if the person is not there to hear it with bodily ears. Because the soul that has just visited you is listening, and that act of love, that gesture of healing you make without witnesses and without any guarantee of visible response, arrives, and it does the soul a good that you will not be able to measure until you reach the same place where that soul is now. There is something Saint Teresa of Avila understood about grief that psychology has taken centuries to express, in different words. That the pain of loss is not only pain over what is gone, it is also, and perhaps above all, pain over what doesn't end, over the bonds that are still alive even though the person has gone, over the love that is still there, with no visible recipient, unable to express itself in the ways it could when the other was present. That love, with nowhere to go, is one of the most pure and most desolate forms of grief. And Saint Teresa of Avila had something very specific to say about it. She said that this love is not lost, that it is not a love without a recipient, that the recipient still exists, still has the capacity to receive love, only through different means than the ones we knew, and that one of the most sacred tasks of someone who has lost a loved one is to learn those new ways of loving, not to replace what was, not to pretend that death has not happened, but to continue the relationship within the new order that death has established. A relationship that is real, even if different. A love that still flows, even if through channels we had never known before. The 5 birds we have walked through in this account are, at their deepest, 5 different ways in which that love can be communicated. 5 forms in which the providence of God, which wastes nothing, permits the bonds of the heart to keep functioning even when the body is gone. The wood pigeon that comes in the early days of grief as the first touch of a love that has not departed. The humble sparrow that appears unannounced, bringing only the simplicity of the love it carried in life. The swallow that comes and goes, image of the soul still in transit, still moving, not lost, but walking. The robin with its red breast, carrying in its coloring the full cost of a love that was real and has not faded. And the nightingale, singing in the darkness, telling you that the soul is still itself, still loving, still praying, even if you cannot hear its voice directly. But there is something Saint Teresa of Avila had not yet fully said, something she was on the verge of sharing with her sisters in one of the final chapters she composed in Castilian before her death. Something about these visits by birds that her sisters had been waiting to understand fully, but which her death arrived before she could bring to complete expression. What is preserved in the manuscripts is enough to follow the direction of her thinking. And that direction points towards something that closes the central thread of everything you have heard today. Something that changes not only how you see the bird at your window, but how you see yourself in relation to those you love and those you have lost. What Saint Teresa of Avila was about to reveal, what her sisters awaited in silence, and what remains in the manuscripts with enough clarity for those who know how to read with the eyes of the heart, was not a new doctrine. It was not a private revelation requiring decades of examination by the Church. It was something far simpler and far more powerful than that. It was the answer to the question this account has held open from the very beginning. The question of what the bird at your window truly is when a departed soul comes to visit. Saint Teresa of Avila put it this way, in her own words, as preserved in the Carmelite archives. The bird is not the soul. The bird is the door. The soul does not become a bird, because souls do not become animals. That is a pagan belief that the Catholic faith rejects with complete clarity. What happens is something different and far more beautiful. The soul, on its journey toward God, has the capacity, when God permits it, to touch creation in a way that creation responds, like a finger pressing lightly on water and producing ripples that spread far beyond the point of contact. The soul touches something in the natural order, and that natural order responds in ways we perceive as signs. The bird does not know it is being used as a messenger. It is simply moved by a force beyond its instincts, a force that leads it to where it needs to be, holds it there for as long as it needs to stay, and releases it when the mission is complete. This resolves something that many people feel as a contradiction. If it is my mother's soul, Why does it appear as such a small bird? If it is someone great whom I love, why does the visit come in such a quiet, unassuming form? Saint Teresa of Avila's answer is that the quietness is not weakness, it is mature love. The soul that has advanced in its journey of purification does not need spectacle to communicate. It does not need dramatic phenomena or apparitions that startle. It needs only a point of contact, a still bird on a windowsill, to deliver what it wants to deliver. And that economy of means, using the smallest and most humble things to convey the greatest and most eternal realities, is perfectly in keeping with God's way of working. He used a manger, he used bread and wine, he used the wood of a cross. And what the soul wants to deliver, what it leaves in that moment of contact through the bird, Saint Teresa of Avila summed up in 3 things that are really one thing seen from 3 angles. The first is the certainty that it still is, that it did not dissolve into nothing, that its identity, its personality, everything that made it who it was, remains intact and continues to grow toward its most luminous form. The second is the certainty that it still loves, that the love it had for you on earth did not go out with the body, but was purified and became cleaner, freer, fuller. And the third is a request, a concrete, urgent request that the soul makes each time it finds a way to draw close, one we have the power to answer or to leave unanswered. The request is this: do not forget me before God, not in the sense of sentimental remembrance, which has its value but is not enough. In the sense of active intercession, mention that soul in your prayer. Carry its name to Mass. Offer something for it that cost you, a small sacrifice, a fast, a work of mercy done in its name. These are the coins of the spiritual economy that governs the communion of saints. And the soul that receives them uses them to advance, to be purified more quickly, to arrive sooner at that threshold of light where God waits with a patience and a tenderness that no human language can fully describe. Saint Teresa of Avila always ended teachings like this one with a question that was not rhetorical. It was real. A question she aimed directly at the heart of the one listening, and that waited for a genuine answer. The question was, when your own moment comes, what will you want those who remain to do for you? Because we will all be the bird one day. We will all walk that road of purification. We will all need the active love of someone still on earth, someone who can do for us what we can no longer do for ourselves. And the surest way to ensure that someone will do it is to do it now, for those who have already gone. There is a reciprocity in the communion of saints that Saint Teresa of Avila described as one of the most beautiful evidences that God's plan is, in truth, a plan of total love. A love that wastes nothing, abandons no one, works with what we have and with what we are to bring us all toward the same destination of light. The bird at your window is part of that plan. You are part of that plan. And the soul that came to visit you is counting on the fact that today, after hearing all of this, you will do something to help it continue its journey, not tomorrow, today. Because love, when it is true, does not wait. That is what Saint Teresa of Avila wanted her sisters to understand. That is what has reached you today, through her writings and through everything she left behind for those who would come after her. You made it to the end, and that is no small thing. In a world that offers noise from every direction, that pushes you to jump from one thing to the next without settling into any of them, you chose to stay. You chose to listen. You gave time to something that your heart recognized as true before the words had even finished arriving. And that choice has a value you may not be able to measure just yet, but it is real. Today you received something Saint Teresa of Avila kept for centuries within her pages, waiting for those who would be ready to receive it. You received the 5 birds, the wood pigeon that arrives in the early days of grief, the first touch of a love that has not gone anywhere. The humble sparrow, representing the soul that returns without making a show of it, only with the simplicity of the love it carried in life. The swallow that comes and goes, image of the soul in transit, not lost but walking, moving forward. The robin with its red breast, carrying in its very color the full weight of a love that was real and has not been erased. And the nightingale, singing in the darkness, telling you that the soul is still itself, still loving, still praying, even if you cannot hear its voice with the ears of the body. You received the 4 criteria of discernment that Saint Teresa of Avila left in writing, so that you can recognize, with peace and with clarity, when the bird at your window belongs to the order of loving providence, the timing of the grief, the unusual behavior of the bird, the interior peace that arrives before the mind has time to interpret anything, and what the encounter leaves behind when it ends, not disturbance, but an impulse toward God, toward prayer, toward active love. You also received the most practical and urgent answer, what to do when the bird arrives, the immediate prayer of the heart, the Mass offered with that intention, the rosary placed in Mary's hands, and forgiveness, that private act of love without witnesses, which the soul hears from wherever it is, and which does it a good you will not be able to measure until you reach the same place it is now. And you received, at the end, what Saint Teresa of Avila was on the verge of revealing, what her manuscripts preserve with enough clarity. The bird is not the soul. The bird is the door. And what passes through that door is a certainty, a love, and a request. The certainty that the soul still is. The love that was purified and became cleaner than it had ever been. And the request the soul repeats each time it finds a way to draw near. Do not forget me before God. Choosing to stay was the best thing you did today. Not because this account was perfect, but because the love you have for the person you lost deserves to be understood. It deserves to find channels through which it can keep flowing. It deserves to know that it is not sealed inside grief, but can become suffrago, prayer, Mass, rosary, forgiveness, a life well lived. That love was not lost when they departed. It is still yours, and now you know what to do with it. There is something Saint Teresa of Avila always reminds us of, that the spiritual journey ends at no point in this life, that every new understanding is not a destination, but a point of departure, that every time the soul receives light, that light moves it forward toward more prayer, toward more love, toward a deeper desire for God. What you received today is not something to tuck away in a corner of your memory as a beautiful curiosity. It is something to use. Tonight when you go to bed, carry that person's name to the Lord. Say it in your own words. No formulas, no set prayers needed. Just say, Lord, here they are. I love them. Help them. And that will be enough to begin. And if tomorrow, or on any day that comes, a bird arrives at your window and something in you stops, you already know what it means. You already know how to look at it. You already know how to respond. Not with fear, not with agitation, but with a quiet, active love. With the peace of someone who knows that the bonds of the heart are not cut by death, because God Himself wove them to last beyond any separation. There is another message waiting for you. One more teaching from Saint Teresa of Avila that picks up exactly where this account ends. Because this saint did not leave behind a single isolated truth. She left a complete path, a trail of spiritual understanding that reveals itself gradually to the soul with the patience to follow it. What is coming speaks of something you may have wondered about for some time, about your departed loved ones, about what happens to them at certain moments of the liturgical year, at certain feasts that the Church does not celebrate by accident, but because at those times the veil between the two worlds has a different texture. Saint Teresa of Avila knew this. She wrote it down, and it is there, kept for you in the next message. When you are ready, when your heart has had time to settle with what it received today, go and find it, because what is coming carries the same warmth as this, and you need it. May God keep you. May Mary cover you with her mantle. May the angels who accompany you on this road keep you close to the light. And may the soul of the one you love, that dear person whose name you wrote in the comments today with such love, find in your prayer the strength it needs to keep moving toward God. Saint Teresa of Avila, who knew the pain of loss and the certainty of resurrection with equal intensity, walks with you in this moment, and her intercession, which never fails for those who seek it in humility, goes with you today and every day that comes. Go in peace.